Two vascular surgeons walk into a bar and come out with a podcast. We are talking everything vascular and not. Welcome to the Life of Flow podcast.
The following podcast is not relating to my teachings and work at Del Cedar Medical Center and is for entertainment purposes only. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Life of Flow podcast. Miguel, you want to say hello?
Hello, everybody. Why are you laughing?
And today we were lucky,
Super lucky.
to have Eric Secemsky. Am I
Eric
killing
Secemsky.
His last name?
Nope, Secemsky.
Eric is the Director of Vascular Intervention at Beth Israel Deaconess, Section Head of Interventional Cardiology, Vascular Research, and Smith Center for Outcomes Research, and Associate Professor of Medicine at the Harvard Medical School. I'm glad that we're taking this so seriously,
Just a
Miguel.
stud.
Yeah.
Just a stud. No, it was a great conversation, part of our Link series, and I hope you guys enjoy. Stick around and learn a little bit more about Eric and some of his novel disruptive research in atherectomy. So needed.
So needed.
So
All
needed.
right. Let's go.
Welcome to yet another episode of Life of Flow today here
Live at Link.
from the beautiful cold
East Germany.
No, that's so politically incorrect. Germany is a beautiful, perfect, integrated, and socially diverse country, and it's come a long way. As you both know, I did my training here almost 3 years back in 2005 or 6. And it was a little rough back in the day.
Yeah.
So yeah. I mean, you couldn't. There was a lot more Russian spoken than what it's now. I mean,
Really?
brother.
I didn't realize.
Oh my God! When I got here, good luck if a taxi driver would speak a word of English. So they would maybe hit you with a little bit of Russian or German, of course, and good luck if you had anything else. There's absolutely no way.
Okay.
And I mean, I have some pretty interesting stories of stuff that happened to
this
me.
This episode can just be about that.
You and I can maybe do one, you and I alone, about just the shit that happened to me in episode. And I'll just leave it up there. But there was one night where I ate a can of tuna and I was in severe abdominal pain the entire night.
Oh.
And then I came to realize that it was cat food.
Oh,
yeah,
that's a tough one.
Yeah, it was that well developed of a language barrier that it was like my first day here, and I was
the whole thing.
The whole thing, and I remember putting mustard on it because it tasted like shit.
But I mean, at least their cats are well taken care of. If you can eat that, right? Yeah, I mean, they're doing something right.
Oh my God, my stomach hurts.
Dude,
now.
listen, here's the funny thing is I don't want to type it, but I was like, wait a minute, where I come from, there's a damn cat on the can. This had a fish on the can, but it said cat food, right? But I didn't read that. But there was a fish on the can.
But you smelled it and you ate it.
Yeah, it was okay. I mean, it was,
But
it was a little stinky.
mustard.
Dude,
With mustard,
remember, it took me like 7 legs to get here. I was on a budget. I remember buying the worst ticket in the world.
Yeah.
I think I went around the world 5 times before I landed with a backpack, not a single word of German.
Yeah.
Costa Rican in an island of ignorance and dying. And I took whatever money was left and I bought myself a delicious can of cat food, and it was meow-tastic. I'll say it that way. Okay. Anyway, okay. So let's get back to it, man. We've got an awesome guest, Eric. Thanks for being here, man. It means a lot. We go back a few years now, and you are just part of that meeting family of people that we see every time, and it's just such a joy to run into somebody again. And again, I always say it's my meeting family. When you go and you're going to have fun because it's the few people that you always talk to. But Eric, for those of our listeners that are not lucky enough to have met you yet, and maybe want to know a little bit more about you, how about we start the show off talking about your path? How did you get into this world of vascular care, and what ignited your passion? Because you're one of the super gung-ho people out there. The energy that you bring, the motivation, how you push, your resilience, and also the publishing, right? Like you're a machine. Like you're out there, you're pushing the needle. And I don't think that there's a lot of talkers and then there's doers. And I put you in that, you talk, of course, here in the meetings, but then you're such a doer. Like, you back up your words with actual stuff. So anyway, with that long-winded monologue as to who you are, what kind of started you in this direction?
Yeah, well, first off, those are wonderful compliments. Sorry, I'm moving away from this microphone, but thank you. Thanks for having me here. I've watched episodes, listened to episodes, and it's really great to have an opportunity to be on here. I've been waiting for my invite, so
that's awesome.
Glad we cornered you finally. But I think I really take those words to heart. First off, because I'm a little bit of a underdog in the vascular space, as you know, as an interventional cardiologist. We get depending on who you are and what group of people you're with, we're looked at differently than some of the other vascular providers. And I think hopefully I can explain why that was an advantage to my career and dedication to vascular space. But, when you're a cardiologist right now and you want to do interventional, you're obligated to do coronary. You're trained in cardiology to get to coronary. You do a coronary year. And so I did that. And I was in Boston at Mass General, and I didn't know much about vascular disease. This is one of those, areas where we have requirements in cardiology training to do vascular training. You have to do 4 weeks of vascular training, but most programs have no vascular portions of their cardiovascular division. You try to collaborate with vascular surgery or vascular interventional radiology or some other group, and hit or miss whether you ever get any of that education. And so I went through my fellowship. I got a little bit of it. I didn't know much about it. And I got to coronary and I said, cool, but this isn't enough for me. And at the same time, I had been really focused on the research stuff. I'd kind of come from an early experience where I got into doing just some cool at the bedside research and realized it was going to be part of my career. And I went to Boston with the idea that it was going to be part of my career, but I thought it was going to be coronary. I thought it was going to be a coronary interventionalist with a research career looking at what coronary interventionists looked at, antiplatelet therapy after stenting, and we did imaging and a couple other cool areas. But the main crux happened.
So let me interrupt you there before you go further. Why do you feel so strongly that this calling of yours is important? Why the thought? Because some people are like hate the idea of doing research, right? Some people just want to do cases, and some people, but you not only very early on noted that this is something that I need to do, and then you carried on, and then you pursue it, and then you continue to pursue it. What do you feel is ignites the flame of research? What?
I love that question because we all are put in these positions while we're training to be forced to do research. And there's a lot of debate about whether that's an appropriate part of training. Should everybody in training be forced to publish a paper? Or, in vascular fellowships now, most people spend a year doing dedicated, or maybe 2 years doing dedicated training. And in my program, they do 1 to 2 years. I have a huge vascular fellow research group. And you look at that group, and there are some people who come out and they're fantastic researchers and make that part of their career, but that's probably the minority still. And many people are doing that as a pathway to get into their next position or solidifying their career, and then they end up going to clinical practice. And I think there's a lot of benefit from being exposed to that. But for me, I saw that opportunity where it was just stimulating other areas of my brain that were interested in doing something outside just with my hands. And I think the take home for me, and I've learned this having mentored many people now, is you have to love it or you don't love it. You can't teach someone to love it. I've tried really hard to teach people to love it. And, my questions to them are like, do you wake up at 2 a.m. and write down some crazy research study you want to do, or you've thought of a cool design or something? Are you willing to spend your entire, flight or early morning reviewing papers? Are you not tired of the 5th rejection from a journal and you're able to stomach the 6th one? Those are like always to me, those litmus tests of, a lot of people say, listen, this is a great learning exercise. I can evaluate a research article now, but can't stomach all the other issues that come into doing research. And I just happen to be one of those people who was like, I can deal with these blows. I love it enough. And I'm thinking of my next project and my next one, and I'm thinking about my grants and that really, kind of catapulted itself to being a big part of my career. And, and it ties back into vascular in a really intimate way.
I think what's hard, certainly at the beginning, harder is it's uncompensated work, right? You put a lot of hours for absolutely nothing in return, at least, in a very frivolous monetary way, right? You're not paid for research. And if anything, good luck if you have protected research time on some of your initial positions. Down the line, you grow and you become maybe a little bit smarter. You understand how grants work. Maybe you get, some bigger grants where you can carve some salary out of them and some other stuff. But at the beginning, it's that willingness and that passion, I guess, in a way, it's self-fulfilling. Yeah, because I think it's the inventor in you. It's that absolute need for just figuring shit out, right?
Yeah.
Like it's this, you're curious, right? But it's also that can change people's lives, right? I mean, you can make there's game-changing research that will shape society.
But the people that do that are the people that are passionate about it. It's the people that wake up at 2 a.m. Like the people that are put in there to do like a year or 2 years and to just graduate from a fellowship, that's a waste of their time. That's a waste of everyone's time.
I actually feel that those people actually are an obstacle, because you're expected to do a job, you're expected to produce, and then we're out there trying to chase you down to do your research job, and it's actually more of a pain and a hindering if you don't have that calling.
And then there's a bunch of papers out there that are really not worth much. Yeah. So then they
noise. Yeah.
And then there's noise, and you can concentrate on the work from the people that are putting nuanced ideas out there and really digest those nuanced ideas. So I feel like, there's a bajillion journals, and how much of that is worth your time?
Absolutely. I mean, that's another bigger comment on how do we reorganize everything.
That's
from
enough for another show.
Exactly.
For sure.
Funding research to journal. But I'll say it is back to your comment, it's a constant hustle. And it's not a hustle anyone should go into expecting to be rewarded monetarily.
It's an inner reward.
Exactly. I mean, there are definitely parts of it that pay off down the line, but that's years of investment, and definitely requires you to, again,
be passionate.
My first years on faculty were running grant after grant, rejection, nearly getting knocked out of the whole thing. I mean, I was close to my first grant, got completely ignored, triaged, and I thought this was it. Full-time clinical, not going to make it, had to put it back in. And, the cool thing for me, how it all tied together was coronary intervention. Back in the 2000s, there were a lot of vascular interventional cardiologists. My mentor, Kenny Rosenfield, who was training me at Mass General, was one of them. And then structural heart disease came about, and this idea that we can cure aortic stenosis, and then we can cure tricuspid regurgitation, mitral regurgitation, and that became the sexy thing in cardiology. And everybody in interventional left vascular, they left coronary, went to structural. So I was in this crux of my training where structural was saturated, but still popular. I had a structural spot. I was going to do structural intervention, and I got a phone call. My dad is a retired interventional cardiologist in the community, Chicago, middle of nowhere. And his partner, Polish guy, came to Massachusetts first, then to Chicago, where all the Poles go, including myself, and then out to New York with my dad. And he called me, and he's like, "You're at Mass General with Kenny Rosenfield, and you're going to do structural?" And he's like, "What about vascular?" And I was like, "I don't know much about vascular." And I went down to Kenny, and I said, "Kenny, let me watch some cases with you." I went back to vascular surgeon. I said, when Cambry was there, I was like, "Can I rotate with you guys for a little bit and understand the space a little bit better?" And I did some reading. And again, cardiology has been embedded in evidence-based medicine for a couple decades. When we look at coronary interventions, it is guided by dozens of trials. I always give this talk also, like we have 150,000 patients who've been randomized to different durations of antiplatelet therapy after coronary stenting. And we finally got our third randomized trial on revascularization strategies, for BSCLI and basal 2. So we are at a complete disadvantage in the vascular space, and we've had this plethora of investment in the coronary space. And that's really, two things happened at once. One was I started doing some vascular procedures, and I'm like, these are awesome. Like I can be creative. They're not like totally algorithmic. It's a lot. I mean, I watched you when I was at New York Endovascular doing a pop stick, and and I'm just like, he's just teaching me to frog leg without flipping the patient. Remember this case? And I was but like these are the things that you developed, having done this and then iterating and then having done this. And I was like, God, I can be really creative here. And then I stepped back and had this academic pursuit, and I'm like, there's a lot of stuff that I can bring from what we've done on the evidence formation and coronary to vascular, and maybe it'll pay off. I didn't know, but I feel like at least what I was working towards could potentially make a bigger impact in this space than maybe being the 100th person that say that antiplatelet therapy for a year after a stent is worthwhile. So that was really where everything changed for me, and I dived in deep, and I had really lucky opportunities because Kenny had been the Levant 2 PI. He had been, very active in the PAD space at the time. Pulmonary embolism was coming about, and he was also the PI, and we were doing some of the first thrombectomy devices. And then Michael Jaffe came into my life. He was at Mass General at the time before we moved on to.
We just interviewed him,
yeah. And Michael's now
He was just on the show.
is a CMO of Boston Peripheral, and Michael became an immediate mentor for me. And so I had these behemoths in vascular, at least on our coronary cardiovascular side, helping me kind of launch my research career. I'm excited about the clinical space. And then I got an opportunity to go across town in Boston and start my own program. And that was where everything took off.
That's awesome.
It's amazing.
How important is it to find some good mentors along the way, right? It's so shaping. I go back, one of my biggest ones. Well, first was there's a vascular surgeon that was my dad's best friend, and that's what made me go into vascular. I was, and you know what I loved about him? I had no idea what vascular surgery was. He was just the coolest dude ever. Like
That's
he
all
was,
you need sometimes,
dude.
right?
He was
Yeah,
the
that's all you need,
coolest.
yeah.
He was the guy. He'd come on a Friday. Like my dad would he'd call his buddies from medical school, and they get together and drink or whatever. And he would come, and he would hey, I stopped downtown and I picked up a trio, and in come these guys with guitars and maracas, and they start rocking. And I remember being a kid being like, this guy is a god. Like, he is so fun. He is so outspoken. And then he's the one that ultimately shaped me to be a vascular surgeon. So what a weird serendipity. And then the other one was Andre Schmidt.
Mhm.
When I saw him doing live cases 2004, and I'm like, I want that guy to teach me. And it was a pain in the butt to get there, right? Because it was find where's Leipzig? I didn't even know where Leipzig was, what country.
Cat food.
Yeah. I had to eat cat food to get there, literally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll write a memoirs one day, and I'll put that. It's going to call it cat food.
Yeah.
That sharp.
Yeah.
But these people, and I don't think Andre knows
That you ate
how-
cat food?
he does. He knows that story. But I don't know that they know how impactful, a brief interaction or a brief moment or a tiny, small portion of their time means for our careers and how they can shape us.
Yeah.
And then it also in a way puts a big responsibility on who are we then going to mentor?
Mhm.
What do we
Absolutely.
mean for the next ones? Has that been your experience with mentorship?
Oh, it is. I give a talk every year to the incoming fellows, and that's like the number one bullet point on my slide. And when people come to me and they're like, oh, I want to work with your group and do research, I say, well, great. What's your goal? It's like, oh, I want to get 30 papers published in 3 months. And I said, well, that's not our relation. That's not how this would work well for me, because I want everybody to reach their goals, and maybe that is their goal to get 30 papers. But the goal I want them to come to is say, listen, I want to learn this process. I want to be, excited about it. I want to be motivated about it. I want to form a relationship that will help me get to the next step of my career and whatever it might be. And sometimes that's clinical, sometimes it's academic, it's both. But relationships are the only reason why I'm here. I mean, purely. And I'll tell you, there's the main mentor in my life was a guy named Bobby Ye, who's a coronary interventionalist.
I've heard that name.
Yeah, Bobby's very well known and throughout any realm, but in particular in the cardiovascular space. And Bobby came into this. He was a few years on faculty. I was one of his first fellows. So we weren't that far apart, but we had these different roles. Obviously, him being on staff, me being still a fellow. But he was exactly like you were talking about with your mentor to go to vascular surgery. Just one of those guys that you wanted to be around, that, he carried himself the way you wanted to carry yourself. He did his procedures the way you wanted to do them. He interacted with patients the way, and then he had this crazy mind for research that was just alternative thinking to what everybody else was doing. Everybody was doing, we got to do clinical trial. And he was like, we got to do a clinical trial, but we need to build in the real world evidence to support the clinical trial. And how do we make real world evidence not the 30 papers that people just churn down and fill the journals up with, but make it at a different standard where people can actually rely on it as a guiding path to maybe that randomized trial that comes after, or in the case of paclitaxel, as the first sign of maybe that we can keep moving forward with these devices safely, and then we'll continue to evaluate them. And that was the pure motivation to my academic career was, he's got this great framework I want to learn. He's concordant and coronary. I've got this crazy accessible disease state and vascular that needs this type of research. How do I make and leverage this opportunity to take my mentor and build off what he's built and become that same person in a different realm? And that was it. I mean, and those, again, I think about this all the time. And I care so much when I get an opportunity to mentor that it's not a paper. It's not a quantifiable, mission. It is a relationship. It is knowing that I'm here to support you. It doesn't matter where you go. You can't let me down. You can't fail. As long as you're invested and you're excited and you're doing something you want to do, like that's reward, and that's all you need.
Where did you learn that?
I mean,
is that something that came in your programming, or is that something that you saw? Or
I mean, I think most of the stuff we learned by example. I think I had a lot of selfless mentors. Again, Bobby being one of them, Kenny in his own right being one of them, Michael, Jeff being one of them. But I think you see this and then you want to be it, and then you practice it, and then you become it. And I think that was really key to me. And as much as it sometimes seemed like a one-way path with mentorship, you're trying to help someone get somewhere. It's bi-directional, right? Like I pride myself more on the people that I can train to go out and do amazing stuff than anything I can do myself. Because sure, I can make an impact right now, but that's not going to be a lasting impact, right? I'm only going to be here for a finite amount of time. And also, the more that we can add to the space, the better everybody's off. So, that's been my approach.
Seems to me like we end up becoming like good friends too. Like,
yeah,
absolutely.
Like, I don't know. I wouldn't say that I have 100% batting average on that. I would say that most of the people that I've had the opportunity to train and share long hours and a lot of work with, we still today remain, very connected. And it's interesting to your point, you can't fail, right? You'll call me if you have a bad case.
Absolutely.
Let me know what's going on. And we have, I think we even have a little chat where we've got, 4 or 5 of us from like that time that I had in a way been faculty to all of you. And now it's more like an AA group.
Yeah.
Because we're like just sharing like, I just went out to, pull a stent out of the right atrium, guys.
Yeah.
And then everybody's like, we get it. I tried to do a nutcracker and it just went up and it was horrible and they had to crack a chest. I was like, hey, we get it. It is part of what we do.
Absolutely.
And then we just have Bernardino. The medical system sucks. I can't wait to go to Montana and not see a human being ever again. I was like,
there's dark people in the chat, but it's very interesting. It's very rewarding.
Yeah, I mean,
just
a few. Every time I get a call from a former mentee, I mean, it's like makes my day.
Yeah.
I pick up right away. And I had a former mentee call, and he was struggling early in his career, and that usual path of you always get that 3 in a row bad complications. They always come in threes.
Yeah.
And then you sit back and you're like, am I really meant to be doing this? That type of call. And he called me, and I was like, listen, I trained you. You are fantastic. I had no doubt you're going to be fantastic in practice. Every one of us have these 3 complications that happen in a row every couple of months or every couple of years, and then you get back at it. And we had a great conversation, but just getting the call, didn't even matter what the conversation was. It was getting the call to be like, wow,
such a compliment.
exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Like that. This was the person he wanted to talk to. Yeah. I mean, that he had that trust, that you have that chat to whether it's as a group or individuals, to say, listen, I just need some support to keep going forward, and I'm looking at you to give that to me because I know you're the right person help me keep moving forward, and I think that speaks a lot, and you can't get that reward if you don't have these interactions.
It's unfortunately in our careers, we don't teach enough vulnerability.
Dude, we have the worst fucking emotional IQ of any group of humans on planet Earth.
As a culture, you mean?
As a culture,
the culture within the medical system.
I don't know about
is
cardiologists,
unfortunate.
but let me tell you, vascular surgeons, bro.
Yeah, we are all one and the same.
Well, the thing about vulnerability, I think, is in a way, it's probably one of the most intimate things you could ever do with somebody, right? I mean, but in a way, you have to have the trust and the certainty that whatever you're being vulnerable about is not necessarily going to be weaponized.
Yeah.
Right. It's almost like at the core of a relationship, right? If you tell your couple something, very intimate, that you're trusting that person to not use that to hurt you, because that that's an insecurity or that that's a problem. And we don't teach enough, and we don't feel comfortable enough. We're ill prepared in many ways to welcome that conversation where somebody can come to you and say, I'm insecure about this, or I'm unsure about this, and I feel and it's very, very vulnerable. And I mean, I can imagine people using that against you, and so I feel part of this being a good mentor to somebody is openly having a conversation at any point in time. You're having a coffee and say, listen, if you're ever in a situation where you're unsure, or you think that you've done something wrong, or you think something, whatever it is, if you're really a true mentor, it doesn't matter how effed up it is, you have to be willing to help that person through it and not ever weaponize it. And that's where nobody trusts you, because that's not what the system is built for. The system doesn't want to hear your vulnerable spots. We want you to be perfect, bulletproof, resilient.
There's a lot of talk about self-care. There's a lot of talk about that, but there's very little action.
And part of that also is when you call that person for reinforcement or support or whatever is, I always look to that person to say, wow, they either have been or could have been in the same situation that I'm in. The best call you get is, shit, my stent went to the right atrium, and they're like, oh yeah, that fucking happened to me 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And that sucked. And I'm like, oh my God, it sucks so much. And then you're like, God, I found I have the necessary support to process this, move on, and realize it wasn't only me. You know what I mean? And I think that is so important. And I don't know if you ever lost a loved one. Again, I've lost a really close family member. It was the same thing. The first person I want to talk to was someone who had gone through that same process, because they can intimately understand what I'm feeling and what you need in that moment. And again, just like that fellow who called me, I'd been in that same spot early in my career, and I shared that exact same thing. And I felt like we can really, provide support and both be vulnerable.
Yeah, I've called Miguel hundreds of times. Hey, I fucked up.
Yeah. And I think most of the time it's I've done that.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
I mean,
oh yeah, it's I did that the other day. Hello, everyone. My name is Lucas Ferrer from the Life of Flow podcast. We are here today to invite you to a very special thing that we're doing here. We're giving back to the community here at Life of Flow. We're involved with Austin Sunshine Summer Camps, which is an organization that's been in Austin for more than 50 years, providing free summer camp to underprivileged kids who wouldn't be able to afford it. Most of these kids' families' incomes is less than $30,000 a year. So we're trying to get enough funds this year to get 500 kids locally to be able to have that experience. And we're calling on our audience to help us achieve this.
That's right, Lucas. Austin Sunshine Camp is really an investment in our kids that will re-up countless dividends for you in your soul and in your emotions and your heart. You are affecting real change and really makes a difference. So here's the deal. Lucas set the account. It actually started rolling already. There's over $1,000. So thank you to everybody that already participated. And we're going to invite all of you that have not to just consider giving a little bit of of the fluff you may have. We wanted to see which entity, which company out there was the most philanthropic, full of the most philanthropic people. So here's the deal. You may put your name if you feel like it, but if not, at least put you work for company X. So if you work for Boston Scientific, you work for Cook, you work for whatever company that is, you place it where the name goes. And so then we're going to tally. So literally tell all your network of people within the company to help you viralize it, because guess what? We're going to have a show dedicated to you, to the people within that company, and we'll throw some ad rolls in there for your marketing company. I mean, our little way of saying thank you to anybody that wants to help us with this project, right, Lucas?
Right. Really appreciate all of your support. We'll give you an update, how much money we raised to really allow these kids to have a wonderful summer. So thank you so much to everyone.
Pura vida.
Vamos.
I just want to be very sensitive because, you know, we're out of the meeting. Where's your time check right now?
Oh, yeah.
I don't want you to missing any important part.
We're in the middle of a busy meeting, and I have some time. You have
a little bit more time.
Yeah.
Okay. Because and the reason why, and I don't care. I mean, if this was the end of it, this is the end of it. Because we love knowing about the people that we bring in, even more so that sometimes what the science or whatever they have to share. But I feel like yesterday I was at a podium, sharing a podium with you, and you released some first data that nobody's seen before. And it was around the topic of atherectomy. And I'd like if...
Are we allowed to say that word still?
No.
I don't know.
You know, I've always been somebody that embraces technology. I'm very curious.
Yeah.
Right? I want to work with these things. And I find, you know, that by using them, I realize where they're supposed to be used. And I can tell you, not every single case is an IVL case. Not every single case is a Jetstream case, right? But there are times where if I don't use it, I'm not going to get the result that I need.
Mhm.
And so these are tools that have been made for purpose, and you have to find and understand how to use them. And all of a sudden, there's all this scrutiny, all this media, unfortunate, kind of media coverage. I always hate when the conversation leaves the scientific room because we have the capacity to have radical candor and tell each other if we disagree, wholeheartedly about something, I have data to refute your posture and I have data to support your posture. But then when we let the conversation escape the scientific realm and go into the media, then I feel the coverage could be a little bit unfair. And then what happens, unfortunately, is these insurance companies are just salivating at the opportunity of finding any excuse to make our lives even harder when it comes to pre-authorizations and things that we need to do. And I'm not saying, and I have no interest, let's not go down that. This is not about who's right or who's wrong or if that guy did that or if that guy did that. What I'm saying is all of a sudden it was like atherectomy is the evil of all evils. And if you're doing it, you're almost like immoral and unethical and nobody should be doing it. And that sort of categorical posture makes the life of those that really need it really difficult. And I'm talking about an operator that's in the front lines, that's caring for the patient, that knows that piece of calcium ain't going anywhere unless I do something to it. And surgery is not the solution for everything. And so I was a little distraught. I was left out there, wondering what should I do? What can I do from my, place to try to progress things? And I was as verbal as possible. I was as open as possible in every forum I had, social media included, and so on and so forth, putting case after case of examples of why it's needed and how do you use it and what's a responsible use. But at the end of the day, I think data talks. And so I don't even know if this has anything to do with your project. And your project may have been before this. But I'd love you to tell us a little bit of how this huge data pool came to and what your thoughts have been about this atherectomy and certainly what you've found through this data analysis.
Yeah. So I'll try not to make this long-winded, but just to extend that conversation, it all ties together with where that presentation was yesterday. So the first thing I did in a truly academic way outside of my local small studies I'd been doing was the paclitaxel controversy, and it really was the founding opportunity for everything that kind of came after. And so, as everybody remembers, and wasn't too long ago, but we had this, strange mortality signal with paclitaxel devices. And I had been playing with data because I'd just been starting my lab and trying to figure out what I was going to study next. And we were in the midst of trying to look at efficacy outcomes for drug-coated devices in the U.S. That was the project I'd been working on. And then on my lap lands this crazy meta-analysis that made no sense to me, right? I looked at it, I'm like, how did we get from no mortality signal 1 year to 3.5% and up to 5 and 7% at 5 years? It was just crazy numbers. And so we replicated what a randomized trial would look like in observational data. And I didn't think anybody would pay attention. And it just so happened a lot of people paid attention. And that became a foundational evidence platform for the FDA to not pull these devices off the market completely. And it was really the first test case of how can we scale real world evidence to make an impact on regulatory decision making, because this was part of the 21st Century Cures Act. There was a whole movement about this in Congress, but no one really figured out how to do it in a smart way, and they didn't really have an opportunity. This was a great opportunity. And then it also became really the platform of, this is going to come up again, right? Like, we need to have a playbook here.
Okay.
And we need to build off it, and we need to mature it, and we can make it an accessible exercise for when the next big thing happens. And so really my lab was founded on regulatory science out of the paclitaxel controversy. I skirted at one point over to IVUS, and Miguel, we worked on this before. And the IVUS exercise was even more interesting because we looked at IVUS, peripheral IVUS. We thought, this is going to be really important. People need to understand it, and people need to see the data to support it. And we started with understanding some of the real world evidence. Miguel, you were on the appropriate use document we did. And now all of a sudden we were set in this weird position where atherectomy was under fire. IVUS was actually getting tied into it. And no one really knows the early part of this, but Blue Cross Blue Shield, one of the other insurers started to now list IVUS as investigational, no longer covered, atherectomy as non-covered, like we talked about. And at the time, all I had was all this IVUS stuff I've been working on. So I went on this call with Evicor, one of the insured people who make the policies, and they said, "Oh, we have no data to support IVUS," and I sent them 14 papers. and we were the focus of the call was just IVUS at the time, but atherectomy was also listed as an issue. And all of a sudden, they came back to us on this call within an hour, and they said, "Okay, we're going to remove that. We're going to continue to cover IVUS." And that was the moment where I was like, okay, now if we start thinking about how to protect ourselves moving forward, just like you said, data is so important, is we had naturally undergone this exercise of building real world evidence. We got lucky, a randomized trial came, we did an appropriate use document, we were doing a society document. We had everything. We had a cost effectiveness analysis. We had everything to keep it alive. And then atherectomy. And so atherectomy followed right after this, and we were sitting at AMP, and I'm sure, Miguel, you were there. This is about a year and a half ago, and I was on stage, and we had a pretty supportive group about saying that atherectomy should not be a denied device, a procedure that shouldn't be denied. And someone up there said, "Well, there's no evidence for it." The easiest comment ever, right? There's no evidence for it. And I said, "Have you looked?" And they're like, "Well, I just know." And I'm like, "Well, we should probably look before we make this comment on a stage in front of a lot of impressionable people who are looking at you for guidance." And someone came up to me afterwards from Medtronic, and we were talking about this, and I was like, "We should just make a slide." All I wanted to do originally was make a slide. I was like, I want on the slide every study that ever came out in atherectomy. Let's just put a slide together and just list the references. So at least we can go up there and say, "Listen, you can say what you want, but I'm going to show you this slide." And maybe it's going to have 3. I had a feeling it would be more than that. And that slide started this whole idea that there was a lot of evidence that no one paid attention to, right? I mean, no one wanted to. They wanted.
It is just not aggregated.
It was never aggregated. It came in
all
pieces.
over the place.
Exactly. It came in pieces. It wasn't all prospective. It wasn't all retrospective, though. There was prospective data, but no one had put it together. And again, there's a lot of different devices. It's hard necessarily to combine them all. But when he did the exercise, we had 300 plus papers. And then you start saying, well, that guy or that woman said there's no data to support atherectomy on stage and never looked. And now we can provide them with that slide they could put in their deck and say, well, now I looked and then there's 300 papers, and that was it. And Miguel, it was all tied to what was going on at the time. We had this, the New York Times article. We had all this controversy about whether atherectomy should even be used. And my feeling was exactly what you said. I may not be the same volume user of atherectomy, maybe it's the next person, but there's never a world where I wouldn't have an atherectomy device in my lab. I definitely use it. And I definitely respect people who use it more frequently to me because they use it better. They use it smarter. And they've created this as part of their procedure, right? And I'm not going to take that away from, no one should take that away from, because you or whoever it might be is doing what they think is best for the patient, and they're using a device that's approved. And that's exactly what should happen. And so that was it.
Yeah, an approved device for an approved intention, which is well done, well executed with good clinical outcome. It doesn't mean somebody else doesn't do it differently, but it doesn't mean it's wrong.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Does it mean something if someone says, I never find that I need that I find a need for atherectomy? If somebody tells you that, what do you think?
Ignorant.
Not doing enough cases.
Not doing enough cases, right?
Ignorance. I honestly think
I try to
go
get
back.
myself not judge, but I do find that limiting mindset.
It goes back to our initial part of the podcast is nobody that has the capacity to be vulnerable is ever going to tell you when they don't understand, don't use, or don't know how to do this, that they want to learn, but they rather would say stupid things like, oh, I just don't feel there's any value. Honestly, you just don't know how to use it. You've never been trained. And instead of saying, hey, how about you show me, and maybe I understand where I can fit that into my care patterns, and then I'm actually going to... So if you don't have enough of that curiosity and that open mind to understand that we're in a progressively changing medical field, that's the other thing. Is like, come on. I mean, go to something else where nothing's evolving. But this is a rapidly evolving area. If you're not open enough to realize that what I did, and I see my presentations from 20 years ago, and I'm like scared at the shit I did. Like these, just, full metal jacket, 40 centimeters with an Everflex stand.
Jesus Christ.
Horrible. At the time, that was the best
metal,
I had.
I remember, oh my God, and full metal silver PTXs all the way from the pop.
That's
all
a beauty.
The way up.
That's beauty.
Oh my God.
But it doesn't mean that I was doing
shivers.
but I wasn't being, there was no malice.
No.
It's I wasn't being a bad operator.
No.
It was what I had at the time, and it was what we had, and then there's an evolution. And I look at today,
you were taught.
absolutely different.
Yeah.
And I've changed.
Yeah, Eric, let me share something. Like, one of the things I love about vascular surgery is the non-standardization of treatment, because it gives I love the space for creativity and for mastery and for finding your way. Like I can spend hours watching Japanese woodworking videos, and I love all the little tools, and they have one little chisel, and I feel like that for vascular surgery. Like, I want to have all the tools, and I would like for one specific thing, I want to have that specific tool, because I love that the idea that it's an art, that is it's an eternal drive to master it. And thus I had, until your words right now, very much resistance to anybody trying to do data to standardize it, because I'm like, fuck, you're trying to take that away from me.
Yeah.
But I appreciate the fact that you're protecting that.
Well, I'll tell you, it's a weird mindset coming from the coronary space. Again, a lot of this stuff comes from, having a backbone in coronary intervention, because two things that are important here in coronary intervention. One, there is no controversy about atherectomy in coronary. If only the highest, most complex volume operators can really master atherectomy, and it's looked at as a skill and not as an overuse. It's not looked at as a misuse. It's not looked at as anything other than it's a harder device to use. These certain people are better suited for it than others. And we have very simple operators in our community, and then we have our complex coronary operators who are doing the chronic occlusions and the high-risk atherectomy and all that stuff. So this is a very built-in part of coronary intervention that is looked at completely differently.
That's why
interesting.
I think
that's very interesting.
That's why if you look at the market share of IVL in coronaries, it's essentially kicking atherectomy.
Yeah,
because it's a balloon.
Yeah,
it's hard to fuck a balloon up, right? It's a balloon with an extra oomph, that lets you prep a vessel probably in a similar way for an ultimate end, for the same technical success
Yeah.
effect, but with less technical skills needed to deliver.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's why it just blew up in coronary. And I think there's some reasons why it blew up in peripheral for the same reason.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then,
yeah.
But the second part, though, to your comment is you can go to Texas and you can come to Boston and you get a coronary stent, and it's probably about 90+% the same procedure done the same way.
Mm.
And that could be outside the US as well. It is very, very similar. And again, maybe someone puts a slightly longer stent or a slightly bigger stent, but the whole approach is founded on a basic algorithm. And then you can dance around the algorithm and you can be creative and whatnot.
Yeah.
But that's the thing I wrestle with in vascular, because again, I started this saying exactly what you just said. I loved it for the innovation and to be able to be creative. But on the other hand, I look at where we get knocked as a field. And like when I looked at Best CLI, for instance, my interpretation of Best CLI wasn't surgery one. It was, we need to keep making endovascular better.
Yeah.
Because endo's not going anywhere. We don't have enough vascular surgeons that can do what you guys do. And the only way to really serve our population is to be able to make endovascular labs like HOPE accessible to patients who need it in areas where there aren't typically vascular surgeons, or the capability to have a queue waiting for the OR suite.
I think you have to look at a like higher meta level than that. There's one area where there's innovation, where there's human effort and human energy to constantly make it better. There's one area that's been the same forever and nobody wants to innovate. And they say this is the best and it doesn't need to change. That, if you look at history, that's a failing algorithm. That's a failing equation. You'll never be better. So, I just find that kind of stuck mindset where it's like, oh, an open bypass is always going to be better. It might be, but the law kind of probabilities just tells you that if you have enough of a time window, and you have all the energy here, this is just going to be better at one point. There's going to be an inflection. So, fine. You want to be an advocate for open surgery? Innovate. Innovate.
But again, if I did Best CLI over and I said, okay, I'm going to take your guys' algorithm for FemPop intervention and compare that to open surgery, it might look very different than Best CLI. You know what I mean? There's a lot of variation in practice in that trial, in the endo side, where it's probably surgery is a little bit more standardized, I would say, than the endo side. And so, I think there's a role for us to create a backbone of an algorithm that lets you still be you and deviate and innovate, but also that can give us that comfort that, these are the mainstay parts of your procedure that you should be doing. You should be, assessing for calcium. You should be, plaque modification if you have significant calcium. You should be scaffolding these situations, and we're still working on that.
Give us a little brief overview on what you found out doing this, this exploration of atherectomy. Any big take-home points?
Yeah, so we wanted to make a slide with all and then we realized we had a lot there, and so we said let's expand this. We were in an advisory board at Viva with Medtronic. Jeff Carr was there, and we were just spitballing because we were saying, how are we going to get out of this spiral of denials and negative attitudes towards atherectomy? And, we went back to that idea of why don't we really fully understand the level of evidence for atherectomy? Maybe that will give some reassurance that these devices are here for a purpose. And so we took those 300+ trials, and this is really, I'll call her out, Chris Hood, who worked for Medtronic, was really key on helping us look through. I mean, we went through every one of these papers, took out just like a meta-analysis, took out all the main bullet points, what was the primary endpoints, what was used an adjunctive device, ballast stenting, all that. And we created an evidence foundation for atherectomy. And what we found was, again, 300+ studies, a couple dozen randomized trials that no one realized existed. And we created some benchmark performance rates for atherectomy guided interventions that were on par with what you would see in a DCB trial, but a much more complex lesion subset. And we just here at Link broke that down now by device type for laser, rotational, orbital, as well as directional atherectomy, because we know each of these are being used in different lesion subsets. And our goal in the end, we have a paper nearing publication, is that this commentary on stage that there is no evidence needs to end. We always want more evidence. We do a lot of things in vascular that have less evidence than atherectomy. And that should not be the narrative that we stick on for really evaluating the role of atherectomy. And I hope, we've gotten some really positive feedback. I hope this is the right pathway forward. And again, and how we look at any new device, like you said, Miguel, I mean, you've seen so many things before it's ever gotten to the hands of the common operator. And it's, these devices, especially when they become costly, need to have that evidence formation. It could come in many different ways. But it's nice to have it up front and have to be responsive. And so, I think in my mind, it's when I now talk to companies who have new devices, and we're doing this in pulmonary embolism right now, we've been doing renal denervation, is how do we build that evidence portfolio up front? So then when we're encountered with whatever headwind we're going to run into, because we're inevitably going to run into one, especially if it's a costly procedure or device, how can we then come back and be ready for it? And that was the key here, is trying not to be as responsive, but prepared. And we really, we're lucky with what was out there for atherectomy when we really took a deep look for it. So
I think one of the things that I enjoyed the most about your talk yesterday was also, this idea that there's no data, like as a almost like this little, kind of set of words that the nayers just say, well, there's no data. No, there is. So I love that. But then the other thing that I really liked, and it resonated with me a lot, was why when we talk about it, and that's been maybe potentially a mistake that comes from the way that the codes are set, or even maybe the word atherectomy is not even the right word, potentially, is we're putting all these tools into one single bag as if we're like, A, they're all bad, and B, they all do the same thing.
They all have like completely different mechanism of action.
All
It's crazy.
do absolutely different things, and they're for absolutely different things.
Yeah.
And, maybe that simplicity has come to create problems, because you should possibly be saying, like, for example, oh, can you hand me the intimal hyperplasia,
Excavator.
yeah, or degenerator, like whatever, give me a photo ablator for intimal hyperplasia, because that's what's happening, right? This patient has an instant restenosis.
Yeah.
Or hey, that bypass that actually looks beautiful has a 90% stenosis, and it's going to go down if I don't do something. And I'm not going to operate on that patient again. The only thing wrong is the anastomosis. Well, it's intimal scar. So give me the photoablation system at high frequency for scarring around the anastomosis. Well, guess what? That's 37227.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same for any other thing. And so we're in that thing, but that's not what, it's not, I'm not doing an atherectomy of that. I'm ablating the intimal hyperplasia, and then I'm going to use a biological medication that's going to prevent it from coming again, hopefully. But you know what I mean? Like, it's the problem that we're falling in is letting the discourse take this, this kind of, it's an all-in-one.
It's the use of words.
Lumping.
Yeah.
You're
They're lumping
absolutely
it all.
not, right?
Yeah.
And then you talk about, for example, Rotarex. Okay, well, half of the time, if not more, I use it as a thrombectomy catheter,
device, yeah.
right? It's not even an atherectomy catheter. And I bill as a thrombectomy and not an atherectomy catheter.
Yeah.
So it's just, we can't let this conversation be overly simplistic, because overly simplistic things for complicated problems doesn't just make sense, Like, it's good to complicate the conversation. We're smart people. We can elevate the level of complexity when we're talking about this. But anyway, I mean, maybe there's some effort that should be done on coding and reimbursement side.
Absolutely.
That potentially would prevent some of the misalignments that have happened in the past. But anyways, I just thought it was good. It was good. And so, is this already published, Eric? Or
No, we have the paper in my inbox, so a little behind, but my flight home is hopefully going to be productive. But we're close, and again, I appreciate that comment, because we felt it was important to start big and with a nice number to show that there's data to support atherectomy as a class. But again, the presentation I had here at Link was really to your point of each of these devices are meant to do something different, and we can't really evaluate them as a lumping them together. We have to separate them out and understand the subset of lesion types that they're meant to be treating, and that was the point of the presentation here. So hopefully we'll have this for you guys soon. And,
I thought it was a great message.
Yeah.
I thought it was a great message, and it made me think that when I'm going to speak on this, I'm going to make a point about saying what I'm using the tool for.
I love it.
If I have a highly calcified lesion in the SFA and it's short and it's an endo case, and it could be an IVL case, yes.
Yeah.
But I have an atherectomy device that I know is going to perform phenomenally well, and I'm in my setting where that's what I'm going to do for the patient for a good clinical. That's what I'm going to do.
Yep.
And it's it's a calcium modulating device for that particular reason, right? And so I think I'll start using a little bit better. I'll try to be a little bit more astute in the way that I relay that message, because I feel that this is what's gonna. One of my take-home message from this project of yours is that we should be a little bit more astute and polished when we're referring to it, and stop just talking like even the talks like, okay, atherectomy versus this. Stop. Like, why? Like, it's not all the same, and it's not, like we should also be, even the titles of our topics should be a little bit more polished,
nuanced,
and understand that they are just tools for very specific clinical scenarios.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, and Eric, it's like we thank you for putting the work. I mean, this is important to all of us.
Yeah, dude.
And so we appreciate
Keep
that.
knocking it out of the ballpark, because I really love. But by the way, another thing that was lingering here in the back of my mind was how, when we think about, I get kind of pissed about this whole New York Times thing, and then in a way, hearing you talk today, in my mind, I'm saying it's almost like we asked for it.
Right.
Because I was like, the reason why it became that is because we hadn't done the work to be, to be a proof, to be attack proof.
Own it.
Because it wasn't enough. We hadn't done enough effort to be able to stand up to an accusation like that. And so we got kneeled. The whole as an entire subgroup of physicians, we got kneeled by an article. And today, after talking to you, I'm kind of saying, well, rightfully so, maybe. And so instead of being pissed at the fact that they made us look bad, maybe use it and understand that that was a calling to action that needed to happen for us to be able to protect.
Absolutely.
With data, what we do.
Yeah, and we saw the signs. I mean, they were coming, they were coming in papers or editorials or whatnot, but I totally agree. And again, for me, when I sat in that call, as I described for IVIS, and been like, wow, I have answers to all these critiques in papers, in published journals that make, relevant journals. It made me step back and be like, we should be thinking about these type of evidence programs for everything we're doing. Because again, like I mentioned earlier, we're gonna encounter this, right? And anything that we're doing that might, especially those devices in the U.S. that require very easy regulatory pathway. That was the biggest issue with atherectomy, is there was no requirement for randomized trial. DCBs are so safe because they require a randomized trial. So we have incredible level 1 evidence for drug-coated balloons because everybody had to run a randomized trial to get approved in the U.S. But when you're not required to do that, you're asking companies to do it either on their own or post-market when they already are focused on getting these devices in people's hands and sold, and it's an ask for them. And again, that's another conversation. But atherectomy was vulnerable, and there's other vulnerable devices that will come. And Miguel, I appreciate you in both of you saying that this is really how we support our devices moving forward. I think that this is the right approach.
That's awesome, Eric.
Awesome.
Again, thank you very much for spending a few minutes with us today. I hope this is the first of many other times that we can talk. Know that Life of Flow is your house, your home. If you ever need to put out a message or share some data that you feel is compelling, that's important for other people to do it. At this point, we're like at a 10 million followers, I want to say.
Manifestation at work.
Okay. Number 1 podcast in the medical area. And so, but anyway, really, may the light always be on here for you. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you guys both for having me.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.